something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to American Exception. I'm Aaron Good. This is the excerpted first portion of a full episode of the American Exception podcast. If you would like to view or listen to the rest of the episode, subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. We have hundreds of episodes available for subscribers. If you want to better understand the deep politics and history of the U.S. empire, American Exception is the best place to go. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Subscribe if you can, and either way, please kindly like this video and subscribe to this American Exception channel. Gary Aguilar, it's great to finally have you on the podcast.
Well, it's very, very good to be on it, and I thank you very much for inviting me. I'm a great admirer of your work. If I were to reach up to the library and pull out your book, American Exception, because I've shown it to a few people, and flip to the back, you would see I have page after page after page after page filled with my little notes on the stuff you've written. And I think I've told people that you're Peter Dale Scott's heir apparent. And I think that is very, very high praise. So thank you for the work you've done, and you've illuminated me. Just to start, I'm trying to spread the word on your book because I think it's crucially important. I've given it to Bill Simpich and other people who I respect and who I've worked with.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that and for the kind words. The book, I feel, is unfortunately all too accurate a description of the U.S. state, and if it's as though Trump is trying to prove me correct or something by bombing the capital of a sovereign country and getting its elected leader out of there and murdering everybody in the process, and using a invented drug cartel that they now admit was fake as the pretext for it. I mean, this is just, it's unbelievable what we're seeing now. And I could have done an episode this week on Venezuela, but in a way, I think most people that follow me know what I would make of this, but I probably will do something on it soon. But it's just amazing to compare that to the policy statements and actual policies of JFK. I mean, it's not as though there was no Latin American imperialism under his reign, but he tried to move things in a different direction, and the rhetoric was much different. But what we're living through now, I think, is so relevant to the Kennedy presidency and what happened to him. Could you discuss your own history of involvement with the case? Because you've been at this for a long time, and Peter, I know thinks highly of you, and I know Jim DiEugenio does too. And you've done important work and prolific work over the years. So, how did you get into this area?
Well, as a young boy, having grown up in a right-wing Republican family, my parents ran John Birch Society chapters out of our house when I was growing up. They were chapter leaders. I was a member of Young Americans for Freedom, Young Republicans. I'm old enough, which will blow everybody's mind, that I worked on the goal as a 15-year-old, worked on the Goldwater for President campaign with, and was in favor of the Vietnam War and the rest of it. And then, of course, the Pentagon Papers came out, and I began realizing that everything that I believed had been true had turned out to actually be false about what the United States government says and does. And I'd listened to a few debates about the Kennedy assassination because I graduated from college in 1970 and medical school in 1974. And whenever I'd be in the car, there'd be a debate on the national public radio or that sort of thing on the Kennedy case. The critics always sounded to be much more convincing to me. And I picked up a couple of books, including 6 Seconds in Dallas, and didn't really have time to read those things in any detail at the time because I was so busy, going through medical school and doing internships, a couple of a couple of residencies, a couple of fellowships, and then finally into practice. And then the film JFK came out. So I thought, let me pull those books off my shelf and take a look at them again, including Jim Garrison's book, by the way, and began reading it and began realizing, I think that Oliver Stone's done something good here and important, and much of what is in the film rang true. So I was going along when the Journal of American Medical Association published a series, and I was a member of the American Medical Association in those days, published a series of articles slamming Oliver Stone's film, slamming critics of the Warren Commission, and they interviewed the autopsy doctors. Well, by then I knew enough about the case that I knew that what they were publishing was complete rubbish. Not complete rubbish, but most of it was. So I wrote a letter to the Journal of the American Medical Association. They published my letter asking the physicians questions about what they had said in the journal. They not only stonewalled my letter to the editor, but they stonewalled everyone's letter to the editor, including David Mantik's, by the way, another critic, which is a real violation of the canons of scientific discourse to not respond to, I didn't pick my letter for publication, the editors of JAMA did. They thought these questions ought to be answered, and they stonewalled all of them. And I thought, wait a minute, what's going on? So there was a debate with the Journal of the American Medical Association team and critics, which included Cyril Wecht, David Lifton, and a couple other people, Roger Feynman. I flew to Chicago to witness that debate, and like a bloody idiot, that wonderful man, Cyril Wecht, put me on the stage to rebut some of the stuff that the JAMA team had said. And Tink Thompson was in the audience then, and he thought I was a bit of a whack job because he happened to be my patient. Completely independently. And when I said, oh, you're the guy that wrote this, and he thought, oh God, and then there I was in Chicago. But then he was very impressed. He encouraged me. Cyril Wecht said, look, you have some capacities here. Let's get you in to see the autopsy photographs. And so I got special permission from the Kennedy family, Brooke Marshall, and I went in and saw the original and still secret autopsy photographs and x-rays of the National Archives. Then I began studying the case in considerable detail and publishing a lot. Perhaps my greatest contribution, the one that still gets a lot of interest, is a 5-part essay that I wrote many years ago, 30 years ago or more, how 5 investigations into JFK's medical and autopsy evidence got it wrong. And what you find in a general kind of way here, without going into the details, because it's only about a 15 or 20 hour discussion if we were to do that, is that both the original autopsy examination and the report and the discussion in the Warren Commission, then a subsequent re-examination by the Justice Department, then a re-examination by the Rockefeller Commission, another examination by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and so on. And in every case, they make error after error after error. Now, this is a complex subject, and it's a complex case, and so you expect there to be errors. But the errors are not random, and the errors are not particularly subtle or easily made. They're very consistently.
Is it true? Do murder cases, forensic investigations into medical evidence? Is there any case where the evidence is so disputed and convoluted as this? Because I agree with you in a sense that this case is very complicated and there's a lot of things to take into consideration when you talk about intelligence agencies and different intelligence agencies, et cetera, and the organized crime and whatever, bullet trajectories, all these things. But isn't the fact that the medical evidence is so bungled and just contradictory, is there any other case that a murder case like this that you can think of? Because it would seem that it should be pretty straightforward. You have the wounds and they document them and they put it out there, and then that's that, right? Isn't the confusion itself pretty damning and like kind of inexplicable?
Yeah, I think that first of all, I'm not a student of other murder cases. Right. All I can say, but I've closely collaborated with Cyril Wecht. Literally, this is since 1992, a lot of years. Yeah. And what I've reached is that, first of all, I think that the evidence has been falsified to some extent. I think autopsy photographs are missing, and photographic files and the x-rays, which are in the public domain, don't show what you can see in the original autopsy x-rays at the National Archives. And if they ever declassify them, and I would encourage Representative Luna and anyone else who has an interest in this to declassify the original autopsy x-rays. They're no more revelatory or would be no more compromising of a family interest to show the originals than the enhanced versions, which are in the public domain, because the enhanced versions don't show the telling detail, and that is there's a shower, a dust storm, shall we say, of tiny fragments in the right front quadrant of JFK's head, which is inconsistent with an Oswald bullet, period, full stop. In any case, but I think that autopsy, we have all the participants in the autopsy having testified to or said that they took autopsy photographs that aren't in the file, including autopsy photographs of the interior of JFK's chest, an autopsy of the photograph pulling the scalp back, showing the full extent of JFK's wound on the right side of his head. Those photographs just don't exist. And again, you have other witnesses being told to shut up, and it goes on. In any case, in my essay, my thesis was, look, error, I understand. I've written in the peer review literature, and I've done a lot of reading and done peer review, and mistakes occur in scientific studies and certainly in journals, that kind of thing. But when the mistakes are all consistently in one direction, and these aren't subtle mistakes. I mean, the value of my 5-part piece is to show that, look, you don't have to have an MD like I do. You don't have to have an advanced degree. You don't even have to have a college degree. You can just see the kinds of, very tendentious errors made in the direction of supporting the government's case against Oswald. And so that makes you know right away that the fix is in. And the fix is in, by the way, when the people are selected for these various investigations, with the exception of the fact they put Cyril Wecht on the House Select Committee on Assassinations. Everyone else had already been, had raised their arm and saluted the American flag that they were going to support the government.
Sprague, too, I think is
Sprague too, yeah. Well, that's why he was bumped out of there. He was bumped out of there fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So that had got me interested, and then I began. Once I'd studied the Kennedy case, I began really understanding how things work in this country, and as every year goes by, I learn more. I probably learned more in the last year, thanks to your book. Than I'd learned in the previous 5 years. And I think it was an expansion and extension of the work of Peter Dale Scott about deep politics. And I have, I find this endlessly fascinating. So the subject that you were interested about today was the Garrison investigation. And again, I am not Jim Eugenio. I'm not Joan Mellon. And those are the real experts on the Garrison case. So going way back when, and this is probably 25 years ago or so, they invited Max Holland, who is a harsh critic of Jim Garrison and the Garrison investigation, to come to a public forum and debate Joan Mellon on the Garrison case. And he said, yes, okay. And so I was working with the people who were putting this together. And so we called up Joan Mellon, and Joan Mellon said, under no circumstances would I ever stand on the stage with that guy. No way. He's such a scumbag.
Yeah, I knew. I was friends with Joan.
Wait a minute.
I was friends with Joan. She lived kind of close to me too, and she would not suffer that kind of fool like that.
She would not suffer a fool like that. And incidentally, by the way, I probably lived not too far from where you live too. Once upon a time, I did some of my training at Wills Eye Hospital on 9th and Walnut.
Okay. Yeah.
Very, very fond memories, Wills Eye Hospital. In any case, so all of a sudden they come back to me, and Jim Lassar was organizing this little conference, and he said, well, she doesn't want to debate him, so you have to debate him. I'm going, wait a minute, I'm no expert on the Garrison case. But one of the things I've realized, and I encourage everyone who's interested in this subject, you don't have to be deeply knowledgeable to understand in a relatively brief period of time when you are arguing against someone who is defending the government that that the government's case is terribly, terribly weak, and you don't have to be, extremely studied and knowledgeable to be able to debunk it. So I recommend anybody who has an interest in seeing that debate. It's still available on C-SPAN.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, it's still available, and a lot of people were sitting in the audience, and before that, a professor of neurosurgery who defended the Warren Commission's conclusion had also come up on the debate on that very program the day before, and they had me debating him. And he came up, Michael Levy was his name, professor of pediatric neurosurgery at University of California, San Diego, a wonderful guy, by the way. And he basically had relied entirely on work by John Latimer and other Warren Commission loyalists. And he got up and gave his presentation, and I got up and I think fairly successfully. I took him apart so badly, quite honestly, that afterward he went to dinner with us and he said, "Crap, I didn't know any of this stuff that you got up there. I didn't realize, everything that you'd said, because I took him apart point by point by point by point." And so he encouraged me to write a letter to the Journal of American, to Neurosurgery, the peer-reviewed journal, because his article defending the Warren Commission had appeared there. And so I wrote a peer review. I wrote a very long piece, 9,000 words, with Cyril Wecht, and they published it against the wishes of Dr. Robert Grossman, who then who was a co-author in Michael Levy's paper and who sat on the board of neurosurgery. In any case, so he really encouraged me. And he was very thankful that I did that. So I basically took that apart.
That's pretty amazing that he would. That's pretty fascinating and
it's unbelievable
notable that he would say it, because most of these guys you feel like are just like with Holland. Who was the other guy at Marquette? John McAdams. John McAdams. Yeah, they're so obviously just doing a job, that like, of course, they're not honest actors. But the fact that somebody gave a presentation defending the commission who apparently was an honest actor because he could actually be objective about yours, that's very unusual and notable, I think.
Stories are, I could go on for hours about that particular story, but I've written a very long rebuttal, again, with about 75 or 80 hot linked footnotes to source documents, so I can say, look, this is what you said is true, but this is what the documents show, and I would show it, example after example. And I worked with the editors there, and they said, yeah, we're going to publish it. And then all of a sudden I got an email, we're not publishing it. And I called them up and I said, oh, wait, you're not publishing it? They go, we are. Wait a minute. I said, I just got the email. Let me show it to you. And he said, okay, wait a minute. We'll take care. And so I called him back and he said, okay, we straightened out the problem. We're going to publish your rebuttal. Well, what happened? He said, well, I really can't tell you, but, Robert Grossman, who, was a co-author on this, just take a look at the mast of the Journal of Neurosurgery. And so I did, and sure enough, he was one of the editors of Neurosurgery, and he just didn't want that out there. Well, in any case, they published it anyhow, over his objection. Apparently, they were never clear about that, but that was what the implication.
Right.
In any case, so it's carried on from there. But so there I am, being asked to debate Max Holland, and there's a long piece which delves into a number of other issues called Max Holland Rescues the Warren Commission and the Nation. It's
I'll link to that. I'll link to that too. It was a pro magazine article originally, right?
Yeah, way back when. And again, I write unedited, so I am not I'm not the good writer that you are, Aaron, but it's
a good article. I went through the whole article. It's maybe 20 pages or so, but it's
long.
It's good. There's a few typos in it, but whatever.
There's some typos and there's some duplications and that sort of stuff, which they were going to edit it, but they never got around to it.
Yeah, that's what I figured. It was Jim and Lisa just needed to edit it a little better, but we can forgive them. But yeah, the focus of it deals with of this article deals with the Garrison case and Max Holland's attempt to basically just dismiss Garrison on such shabby grounds, really. dealing with this Italian magazine. So maybe you can explain
Yeah,
that.
let's just say
Paese Sarah was the magazine, right?
Sarah. Sarah. Paesesera. So a couple of things by way of background. First of all, Jim Garrison. A lot of people don't know this. He did try Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw was acquitted of being involved in a conspiracy to kill JFK in a trial in New Orleans. There's some interesting medical autopsy evidence in that case, which I don't delve into that article, but nevertheless, there is some stuff at some point we ought to talk about. It's fascinating. But what people don't realize is what Jim Turner,
William Turner.
William Turner, not Jim Turner. William Turner wrote in New Orleans Magazine. He wrote that, yes, they didn't convict Clay Shaw of conspiracy, but the jury was overwhelmingly convinced that there had been a conspiracy. More importantly, it wasn't as if he had just charged him on the basis of nothing. A grand jury indicted Clay Shaw on the basis of evidence that they thought was sufficient to bring him to trial, and the jury was convinced there was there. But the evidence wasn't strong enough to have plugged beyond a reasonable doubt that Clay Shaw was involved.
And Clay Shaw perjured himself as well in that,
and
he lied about
himself.
Having a relationship with the CIA, which
and you know how we know that he lied? You know who told us he lied, or whose evidence provided proof that he lied? Richard Helms, because under oath. And the other thing is this: Garrison never asked Clay Shaw if he was in the CIA. His own attorney, a guy named Diamond, his chief defense counsel, asked him, "Were you ever, did you ever work for the CIA?" And he answered no. And then later on, Richard Helms said that Clay Shaw had provided useful information to the CIA at least 33 times over a period of 8 years. So he clearly was providing information and evidence to the CIA, and he basically lied under oath.
Right, and and later in the debate, because I watched some of the debate, I haven't gotten around to watching all of it because of just time and stuff. But in the debate, I think that you say that there isn't, proof that the CIA was paying Shaw directly or whatever. But I think it did come out in subsequent years, maybe not by 2000 when your article was written, that he was a highly paid contract agent of the CIA, and he had
of the CIA.
QK Enchant. He was part of that program, which seems to be domestic and thus illegal operations in the U.S. as I understand it. Although I think it's a little bit disputed. So maybe can you shed any light on what his actual role was and how that gradually became exposed?
Well, exactly how that came out, I can't remember exactly what that is, but there's no question that what he did, and he was on the board of trustees of what's it called, Comercio. Let me think. I put an arrow.
Mondial Central, something like that.
And this was an outfit that was in Italy, and he was on the board of trustees there. The Italians basically kicked them out because the Italians thought that it was CIA connected. And I think ultimately most people are convinced that CMC, which is the abbreviation for Comercio Central, Mondial Central, that it was indeed a CIA outfit. And he was on the board of trustees there.
Permindex was the parent company, right?
Permindex was the overarching organization that ran CMC. In any case, he was on the board of trustees of that. And apparently, in his trips abroad, he would provide information that the CIA found very useful on numerous trips abroad. And he was also presumably doing something domestically. Exactly what the details on that is, I'd probably have to defer to Joan Mellon, whose book is over here in my closet, or Jim. But yeah, there's no question that he was very much involved with the CIA, and very likely, according to Bill Turner, who, by the way, is a friend of mine and lived about 8 miles from here, and we'd spoken, we'd given talks together, public talks on the Kennedy case. He agreed that he was quite convinced that Shaw had been involved in the Kennedy assassination.
And Permindex seems to be this might be a stretch, but to me it seems like it's quite likely true. it seems to be the model for the Parallax Corporation in that the movie The Parallax View. If you've seen that film, it's because the guy that wrote it was an ex-OSS person. I mean, it could be a coincidence that the name is so similar and that the function seems to be similar. But I mean, Permindex was involved in a lot of nefarious things. It seemed to be a kind of underworld and corporate clearinghouse for potentially for assassinations, according to some researchers. I mean, his involvement with the CMC Bank is actually very notable, or the CMC entity.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think, but as Max Holland put it, there was, and I'll get the direct quote here, so I don't misquote him. I have my article up on my iPad next to me, but that the piece, the story is that Pièce Sera articles, the Pièce Sera, which is a magazine in Italy, definitely writing from the left, and that the Pièce Sera articles were what Max Holland said were the wellspring for Jim Garrison's theory that the CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Well, the Pièce Sera articles said nothing about the CIA. They said nothing about Jim Garrison. They said nothing about this. But what they did say was that the Centro Comercial Mondial was a CIA outfit. And then, of course, it turns out that Garrison showed that he had been and had worked with and been a member of the board of CMC, of this organization. And so Max Holland got it in his head that the whole notion that the CIA was behind this was Garrison's tying Shaw to CMC and tying the CMC to the CIA. But it's complete rubbish for several reasons, not least of which is the fact that Jim Garrison arrested Shaw before those articles came out.
Right, on July 1st or March 1st. Yeah, I mean,
March 1st, and the editors of the magazine, when they were apprised of it, they said, "We never heard of Clay Shaw. We know nothing about that, and we've been in no contact." Now, it turns out that at some point, Garrison had probably apparently seen the articles, but he knew that he couldn't. He didn't have the resources to go to Italy to interview the people who had written these articles, and so he used none of that evidence in the trial. He didn't ask about the CIA, as we mentioned earlier. It was Shaw's own attorney, a guy named Diamond, who asked Shaw whether he'd ever worked for the CIA, and of course Shaw lied.
And Shaw's legal team was paid for secretly by the CIA.
By the CIA. Yeah,
right, and that's discussed in The Cult of Intelligence, right? The book by the ex CIA guy Marchetti, right? Victor Marchetti talks about that. How he was in meetings with Helms, and that Helms and the subject came up. Are we doing enough to help Clay Shaw? And it was discussed repeatedly that and Jim DiGenio's written about this. The CIA was paying for Shaw's lawyers.
For Shaw's lawyers. Well, and there was so in any case, I brought this up in the debate that it had nothing to do with that they played no role in that. And the thing to remember is that the article that a couple of things which I think are interesting to note here is that the article that Max Holland wrote is published nowhere else but on the CIA's website. The original article, okay, it's published by the CIA. Now, I can't tell you who told me this, but Max Holland had been an editor for The Nation magazine and a contributing editor for The Nation magazine, right? I have a very good friend who I'm still in contact with, by the way. I don't even want to tell you how close he comes to this case and other aspects. People won't know his name. Most people won't know his name. In any case, but his name is known. And he worked at The Nation magazine, and he said that Max Holland submitted that article to The Nation magazine, and they wouldn't publish it. So he took it to the CIA. The other thing which I think is important about that is that very unusually, Foreign Affairs magazine typically does not review articles that are online, particularly on CIA. But Philip Zelikow all of a sudden wrote a very favorable review of that article up on Foreign Affairs. And, of course, we have problems with Philip. I certainly, you probably know 10 times more about Philip Zelikow than I do. But Philip Zelikow, I think, has been responsible for bearing lots of very ugly truths. And so
he wrote in Foreign Affairs an article before 9/11 came out, before 9/11 happened. He wrote an article called "The Effects of a Catastrophic Terror Attack in the United States," and it basically, this was in like 1996 or something like this, and it lays out like if there were a terrorist attack, there would be plenty of recrimination about what could have been done to stop it and so on, and then the U.S. would, it could potentially lead to military conflicts abroad to, defeat terrorism and so on and so forth, and a curtailment of civil liberties and more surveillance and so on. So the guy is just a kind of deep state functionary. I mean, that's so obvious.
Factotum.
For access to the rest of this episode and the rest of our vast and growing library, subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Thanks to Dana Chavarria for producing this episode, and thank you for tuning in. I also want to express my deep appreciation to all of our American Exception subscribers on Patreon. Please do consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. American Exception exists thanks to our Patreon subscribers. On YouTube, we will never be viable. You may notice that we have dropped the Devil's Chess Club title from these episodes. After David Talbot had to leave our team due to his second, more debilitating stroke, I kept the Devil's Chess Club name and theme song and intro. I didn't want to close the book on David's partnership with Bryce and me. I had hopes that he would return. David and I had planned to write 2 books together after 2024, one on the ultra-Zionist neocon takeover of U.S. foreign policy, and another on the RFK assassination. It now seems very unlikely that David will return to podcasting or to writing. As such, it didn't make sense to keep using the Devil's Chess Club brand. Still, to pay homage to David and the outstanding books that David wrote with his wonderful research assistant, Karen Croft, we're going to keep using the Devil's Chess Club theme song intro for our video episodes. David, if you're listening, know that we miss you very much. Finally, and again, please do consider subscribing to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. Subscribe so that American Exception can continue to mind the darkness.